Hello. Welcome to the Tangent Podcast with Emily and Aleksa. We are so excited you have joined us. In this episode, we are building on the idea we presented in the last episode, where we discussed if schools were accidentally making students hate maths. Aleksa and I are in pursuit of fostering and building communities where mathematics is something everyone can engage with and learn to love. In this episode, Aleksa and I wanted to discuss how school communities can foster a love for maths and a love of learning. Classrooms may be where the content and subject ideas are presented. However, if it takes a village to raise a child, it likely also means it takes a village to raise mathematicians.
I love that mentality, Emily. I think oftentimes people think that education is a single lane thing, that the student is just working by themselves, on themselves, developing with maybe a little bit of input from the teachers. But actually, we really should be thinking about schools as a whole as a village. And one of the obvious groups that would make up that village would be the teachers. I mean, teachers play a vital role in children's education. You know, they guide, they nurture, they inspire students. But I also think that teachers should be considering their colleagues as part of that village. I'm a strong believer of working between the disciplines and encouraging projects between subjects. I think that in the real world, things aren't so clean cut when it comes to using the skills that we've learned or that we're working towards. And I think that having that interdisciplinary connection is something we should also really be focusing on. I think another one that maybe goes overlooked is that the students as peers are also part of that school community. When we are in a classroom of 25 students to one teacher, the students' first support should be each other. And I think that we are built for community. We're built to encourage one another. And when I was in school, and if we were ever stuck on a question, we were always encouraged to first try it ourselves, then ask those around us. And if we're still stuck, to ask our teachers. And it just built this community. It fostered a classroom culture where we actually worked together. We learned from each other, which I think is such a beautiful thing as well. One of the groups that I think we don't actually emphasize enough is the parents and caretakers. Parents have such an influence on students, and they care about their child and they want them to do well. And I think we saw this shift in responsibility and understanding among parents during COVID. Parents got a behind the scenes look at what goes on in education, and it was helpful for them to understand the role that they play in their own child's education and see how can I be helping, how can I be checking in and making sure that they are actually doing okay, that they're not just coming home, sitting at the table and saying, yeah, school was good, and they can't remember anything they've learned. I think an honorable mention is also the future educators like Emily and I. As we prepare to enter the classrooms full time, it's also important for us to be aware of these different roles in the community of schools and to enter it the best we can. So I've shared who forms a part of a school community, but Emily, how would you say that these people shape students' passions or perspectives on learning?
I think that's a lovely question, Aleksa. And one of the biggest ways I think school communities shape students is through the attitudes they model. As children, we're constantly watching the adults and the people around us. If a parent speaks positively about learning, if a friend gets really excited about solving a problem, or if a teacher responds to mistakes with encouragement rather than any form of frustration, those moments start to shape how we see ourselves as learners and as people. Our passions aren't usually formed by a huge moment. They're built through little interactions with the people and the world around us. And that's why community is so important. Aleksa and I thought we would do our best to include you in who made up our communities and who inspired a love for maths and learning beyond our maths teachers. So Aleksa, who are the voices in your life that inspired a love of maths within you?
I love this way of thinking about the question as well. I think for me, it would be my dad. a lot of people make jokes about when you're doing math homework with your dad at the dinner table and you're sitting there and you're crying and he's yelling at you and you can't get math. And it always makes me think of that scene from The Incredibles when, the dad is just like, math is math, and he doesn't understand, what it is. But for me, that really wasn't the case. My dad is super patient and he works through the questions, with me. And in fact, he enjoyed asking about what questions I did in class, and he'd have a little notebook up and he'd try and work through them himself. And it got to the point where I would get excited to learn new content and to actually do challenging questions because I would make a note of them. I'd bring them home, and over at the dinner table, I would see if my dad could answer them and test his skills. And my dad did study engineering in university, and he is really smart. So if I ever learned something that he didn't know, I always felt really accomplished. I was like, wow, you don't know, how to do the second and third derivative. And, like it made me feel excited to be entering into a new sort of realm of math where it wasn't all about, I want to get this answer so that I can get it right on the test. It made it come alive to make me want to share it. And it wasn't really about how much math he knew, whether he understood the question or not. It was about his attitude. And he saw it, even 20 years later, he saw it as a learning opportunity. And I think that just also gave me a really healthy view of math and of learning in general. And as we spoke about in the village, there's also peers that sit beside you in class that can also form a part of that village. And for me, that person would be my friend Lily. And we were in the same math classroom for 2 or 3 years, but she quickly became one of my closest friends. And some of my strongest memories from year 8 and 9 math class was just being with her, working on problems. She is just this very focused, highly motivated person, and her enthusiasm encouraged me. I loved getting to sit beside her in math class. We worked with each other. Each of us had our strong and weak points. And when we were doing a topic where one of us was stronger in, we would help the other, and vice versa whenever it switched. We weren't afraid to admit to each other when we needed help. And it really just was a space where I could try and fail and know that I had support outside of the teacher. And it was really so beautiful and something that I'm eternally grateful for. And I really do just hope that all of my students can have their own Lily beside them in class. There are many more people outside of teachers who've inspired me, but I'd love to hear about who those people are in your life, Emily.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's so wonderful to hear that you had such fantastic support systems, Aleksa. And I thought I'd share a bit of a different perspective, as for me, my support didn't come explicitly from mathematics, but more from the people who shaped the way in which I engage with learning. My grandfather is always someone I reference when I think about who brought about my persistence to be diligent in the maths classroom. As a young girl, and still to this day, I completely idolize him. He's so clever, quick, and kind. He used to be a tool and die engineer back in the day, and he would do all these mental calculations during game nights. And I used to think, wow, I cannot wait to be older, to be the one to take over board game nights and do all the arithmetic that comes with it. And in order to do that, I need to work very diligently at my maths. So in primary school, I genuinely enjoyed practicing my maths because it felt like I was working towards becoming someone I admired. Years later, I now do the maths during board game club, if we ever play Scrabble, for example. And it's a complete full circle moment. It reminded me that sometimes all it takes is seeing someone you look up to, enjoying something for you to believe that you can enjoy it too. That can be your best friend, your coach, or anyone important in your life. And in my case, it was my grandfather. I also don't think I can have this conversation without mentioning my mom. I credit the curiosity I possess today to her. She was someone who was really good at supporting me with all the questions I had as a child. As a child, I was constantly asking questions, and I still am to this day. And my mom never made me feel like those questions were silly or inconvenient. My mum always met my curiosity with so much genuine interest, and if she knew the answer, she'd explain it, and if she didn't, she was honest about it, and then we'd figure it out together. So looking back, I don't think she realized how important that was, but she wasn't just answering my questions. She was teaching me that not knowing something isn't something to be embarrassed about. It's simply the start of learning which we did together. This is a mindset I really hope to carry with me into every maths classroom with every student. I want to treat curiosities the way my mom has always treated mine, with interest and unwavering support. So Aleksa and I thought we would welcome you to our love of maths through some of our favorite maths media during this episode's Brain Break segment. So Aleksa, I'm so excited to hear about all your favorite maths content and recommendations.
I think this is one of my favorite brain breaks, and it really is hard to narrow it down for me. So I'm just going to share my favorite book, movie, and then YouTube channel, because otherwise I'm going to go down a rabbit hole and we're going to go through, 18 different things. So, starting out with my favorite book, I would say it's Invisible Woman by Caroline Criado Perez. I read this last year, actually, because of a presentation that Emily did where she spoke about math and gender inequality and stuff like that. And I was like, this sounds so interesting. And I read it, and it really was just a book that I do think about on a daily basis. And it really just got my math teacher brain thinking on real life application questions to ask my students. And so I highly recommend it to anyone, especially if you enjoy statistics. It's just such an interesting way to think about it, and it really, really gets you sort of thinking outside the box. For my favorite movie, I have to say Hidden Figures. I think I watch it about once a year. There's just something about women in STEM during a time that it was uncommon, and not to mention, as well, the racist ideologies that were surrounding that time. It just really inspires me. And really, it was one of the first movies that I watched that had to do with math. And from that moment, I was like, that is cool. How can I be Catherine? So I really love that. And lastly, for my YouTube channel, that is one that I always go back to. It would be Eddie Wu. He is just such an amazing teacher. And when I watch his videos, I learn new things. And, I'm going to be a math teacher myself. And so his explanations are just so interesting on topics. And he does it just so visually and gets students interacting and thinking. And if I'm ever stuck on how to make my math lesson interesting or different methods that I can use to explain my students, I always turn to his channel. And it's one of my favorite ways to get ideas for my math lessons. But Emily, I'd love to hear what yours are.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for mentioning Invisible Woman. It's a great, great novel, and I completely adored it as well. And it's the reason why today I want to buy a Volvo if I ever need to buy a car, because of how they pioneered testing their cars using female and pregnant crash test dummies since the 90s. So my notable math book recommendation has to be Flatland by Edwin Abbott. If I'm not mistaken, it was released in the late 1800s, and I love this little novella exploring the idea of greater dimensions through the life of a 2D square living in Flatland who discovers a sphere and gains an understanding of a new 3D reality. It was an interesting way to engage with geometry through literature, which I think is always exciting when we get to experience maths in interdisciplinary ways or in new presentations. Speaking of good presentations, I adore every single word that comes out of Hannah Fry's mouth. I think she's a fantastic mathematician, great author, fantastic role model and online personality in the field of mathematics, and completely compelling. And alongside listening to her, I also nerd out over the TED Ed riddles and their other episodes So we have a lot of recommendations. We hope that you maybe take us up on reading a math book or watching a nice YouTube channel. And we'd love to hear about it in the comments if you've got any other recommendations that you'd like to share with our listeners and with us, importantly too, because we obviously can't get enough of maths media ourselves. Through our degree, Aleksa and I have had the opportunity to spend time in several different international schools across Europe at this point. One thing that has really stood out to me is that even when schools follow similar curriculums, they can feel like completely different places to learn. Some schools create cultures where students feel really comfortable asking questions and taking risks, and maybe in others, there can be more of a desire to get the right answer quickly. Neither of those differences come from the curriculum itself. They come from a culture that's been built by the people within the school. Culture is created in those hundreds of tiny moments. It is the way that teachers respond to mistakes. It's where the students feel really comfortable saying, I don't understand. It's in where the effort is celebrated and not only achievement. It's in where the curiosity is encouraged or quietly brushed aside because there's another topic to get through. When we talk about inspiring a love for mathematics, I don't think we're only talking about what happens in a 45-minute lesson. We're talking about creating a broader learning environment where students genuinely feel like they belong, where they feel capable of learning difficult things, and where mistakes are really a part of the process. And they are not proof that they're not good enough, but rather proof that they're learning. So what is the type of culture towards learning you aspire to create, Aleksa, through both content and classroom spirit?
I think this is a really important discussion to be had in the education realm right now, because creating a positive classroom can be difficult, especially because we aren't starting with a clean slate. And in some instances in the schools, there are already cultures that are ingrained within the classroom and within the students, which can sometimes negatively impact student learning. But putting all that aside, I think the type of culture that I aspire to create in an ideal classroom is one of community, which we've spoken about a lot in this episode. But for me, that's something that's so important because I want my students to feel that they are a part of something bigger, that what they're learning in the classroom is not a means to an end where they have to write an exam paper at the end, but it's actually an opportunity to grow in all aspects. I hate a silent classroom. Now, there are moments where it is helpful for the class to be silent while you're teaching, and that has a place and a time during the lesson. But I also think that a lot of learning happens through the discussions and discovery moments. I want students to take charge of their learning. So when they finish a question set, I want them to take the initiative to find a way to deepen their understanding, whether that is challenge questions, whether that is helping others, creating their own questions, researching a real world application, getting their laptop out and actually looking into how this applies to their real life. And this idea where they take initiative and they have autonomy over their learning, I think is something that could be really transformative, especially for the math classroom. And to add on to that, I never want my students to feel like they are stupid or a failure or like I'm disappointed in them if they don't get the grades that they wanted. I want my students to always feel supported and encouraged, even if maths is not their best subject. Mathematics does not define your worth. It does not define Emily and I don't ever want my students to feel that way. So for me, creating a culture where students can come and feel comfortable to learn, make mistakes, and feel supported for just who they are is something that is just so important to me.
Thank you, Aleksa. I really think you articulated it really nicely, and I would love to be a student in your class. But then again, I learn from you every day, so maybe I'm the really lucky one. We thought we'd share some practical tips for people who are stakeholders or a part of school communities in any way, shape, or form as we round up our episode. So our first tip is watch the language we use about maths, but more importantly, how we speak about ourselves around children. Instead of saying, I'm not a maths person, try saying, I haven't understood this yet, but I can. And we also encourage everybody to create classrooms and spaces where students feel like they belong, regardless of their ability, regardless of their effort, because like Aleksa said, your ability in the maths classroom doesn't define anything about you, but the way in which you treat people, that certainly does. And more importantly, the way in which you treat yourself. We also recommend praising effort, curiosity, and persistence, not just correct answers or very good marks, perfect marks. And something that I've learned through my internships is that when we show enthusiasm for maths, the students latch onto it. Passion is contagious. And whether you're passionate about maths, whether you're passionate about aviation, whether you're passionate about baking, show your enthusiasm, share your passion. It's not something that's embarrassing. It's not something that's cringy. It's something that can inspire someone to engage with their passions too. And like my mom allowed me to, encourage questions, even the ones you don't know the answer to, and we'll figure it out along the way, because we are going to model lifelong learning by saying, let's figure it out together. Aleksa, do you have any practical tips as well?
Love those ideas, Emily. And I also think that we should be modeling those lifelong learnings, especially by just saying, I don't know the answer to that question, but let's try it out, or let's work together on it. And I think that models just such a beautiful skill that we also want students to learn. Some ideas that I sort of also had floating around was that I want to get my students to think creatively about problems. So getting them, outside of the math classroom, getting them working with one another, collaborating, things like that are getting them to think outside of the box. And as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I really want to also instill that idea that you first try, then you ask the people sitting around you, and then you go to the teachers, so that those students around them become their first line of defense when it comes to tackling a question. As Emily has mentioned, questions, they are so important, not just for developing our math skills, but also for getting students to think critically about the topics and about applications. The questions don't always need to be highly related to math. They should be questions that actually lead students to inquiry and discovery. And as we've spoken about, there is math hidden in everything. And so even if you feel like you don't see how this question is relevant, it might end up leading to a eureka moment for your own student. Encouraging failure for your students and trying that, even despite failure, to continue to try and show up, is also creating that healthy mindset that failure does not equal disappointment, but actually that it's learning, that as you're making mistakes, that you're trying again and again. And that is really helpful for building students who are also persistent. One that I also try and do in the math classroom is to cold call on students. And there's a time and a place, and you need to be aware of your students and form that relationship first. And this often comes after creating that culture where students feel safe, but it helps them to face that fear head on of, what if I get the wrong answer? Because oftentimes, if you think, who puts their hand up when you ask a question, it'll be the same 4 people every time. And I think that that's why it's important to cold call on students, to help create that culture of everyone gets a chance, everyone has an opportunity to try, and even if you might not know the answer, give it a go. And I think that these are some really helpful ways. Obviously, again, an ideal classroom, and we know that it's not always super easy, and different classrooms require different adjustments, and we're not saying that this is a one-size-fits-all, but these are just some practical tips that we've found to be helpful through what we've learned in university, and also what we've encountered on our internships.
Yes, thank you. Beautifully summarized and concluded as well. So thank you for listening to our tangent today, where we shared our optimism for the future of maths classrooms and how we want to start tackling building this love of mathematics. And Aleksa and I cannot wait to welcome you to our next episode, where we will share a little bit more about ourselves and how we ended up in the maths classroom. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again in 2 weeks' time.